Welcome back, fellow nostalgia seekers. This is Howling Through Neo Tokyo, where we hold on for dear life as master mangaka Katsuhiro Otomo takes us on a wild ride through the perilous streets of Neo Tokyo. Last time, we watched the military's pursuit of Kaneda and Tetsuo intensify as the biker gang's intervention at the pier came to a bloody conclusion. In the end, Yamagata lay dying, while Tetsuo, Kaneda, and Kei all fell into the military's clutches. Inside the mysterious military facility, the Espers, a group of psychokinetic children created by the military, hatched their own plan to take out Tetsuo. They pooled their powers to wield Kei as a puppet in their conspiracy, leading her and Kaneda on a daring jailbreak from the military prison. Along the way, they picked up an experimental military weapon, which they used to battle Tetsuo, leaving chaos and wreckage in their wake. Tetsuo used the chaos to his advantage, though, as he fled the military compound, in pursuit of the enigmatic Akira. I'm Boy Meets TV, and tonight I'll be your guide through Neo Tokyo's tangled web of dark secrets and psychokinetic wonders. Chapter 9, Stalkers. Chapter 9 opens in the Esper's playroom, which is now a scene of utter destruction after the clash between Kaneda and Tetsuo. As Colonel Shikishima rises to his feet, Kaneda calls out for Tetsuo, his former friend, searching for him within the rubble. Kyoko tells Kei, ominously, that Tetsuo's no longer there. He's on his way to get Akira, and they need to hurry. They must stop him. The Colonel, blood dripping down his forehead, accuses Dr. Onishi of disclosing Akira's whereabouts to Tetsuo, a fact the doctor does not deny. Instead, he justifies the act as self-preservation. Tasked with preventing Tetsuo from reaching Akira, Kei beckons Kaneda to leave before the Colonel can get a hold of them. They flee through the rubble of the Cat Arch, but not before hurling a few insults the Colonel's direction. Once the duo leaves the playroom, they run into a squad of soldiers patrolling the hallways. After overhearing the soldiers' distress regarding the Colonel's well-being, Kei uses her quick thinking to send them running to his rescue. It almost works, as all of the soldiers begin to run towards the Esper's playroom. However, one of them suspects something and stands back. The soldier orders the duo of Kaneda and Kei to halt, realizing that they're clothed in prison uniforms. Brash as ever, Kaneda fires a laser at the soldier, just barely grazing the top of his head, as the beam wanders violently around the hallway, creating zigzagging fissures of molten red concrete that bring the ceiling down on top of him. Kaneda and Kei continue their flight, rounding a corner before they reach an elevator. They summon the lift, just to be greeted by a whole squadron when its doors slide open. The two turn tail and run, before Kaneda realizes he has a freaking laser beam.
Frickin' laser beam!
He turns back and aims it point blank at a soldier's chest before pulling the trigger. The red light flashes, but there's no effect. The battery ran out. He drops the thing and bolts, coming to a staircase without even noticing it, and taking a tumble, which it's great that Otomo recognizes Kaneda's ability to play the comic relief in almost all situations. His stupidity and bullheadedness really is the gift that keeps on giving. Kaneda tumbled down to the bottom of the flight of stairs, where a soldier begins to fire on him. The bullets land all around him, kicking him into gear and forcing him to throw himself headfirst down another flight to evade them. At the bottom of the stairs, he regroups with Kei as the soldier makes his way down the steps behind him. Kaneda, now putting his bullheadedness to good use, sneak attacks the guard as he turns a corner. Kaneda punches him in the jaw before jacking his weapon and firing up the stairwell to slow down anyone else who might be nearby. The duo resume their descent of the stairs, eventually reaching what appears to be a poorly lit parking garage. Thinking they hadn't descended enough to reach the ground floor yet, Kaneda asks out loud where they are, to which a hitherto unseen shadowy figure replies that they're on the 8th floor. Alarmed and defensive, Kaneda aims the gun at the man, who steps out into the light as he pleads with Kaneda not to shoot. If you've been paying attention, He may resemble someone we've seen before, but neither Kaneda nor Kei seem to recognize him. The man says he wants to help. He knows that Kei must be a part of the Resistance. His friend was the one who originally helped the Resistance spring number 26, but said friend has since gone missing. Now this bespectacled man wants to help in his friend's place. Without many other choices, Kaneda and Kei decide to follow him, fleeing through the garage, where we get this really cool panel where Otomo shows their silhouettes cast against the Neo-Tokyo skyline. Back in the Esper's playroom, the soldiers scramble to get the backup power running in the facility as we zoom in on Kyoko, fatigued but determined. She is adamant that the Espers must control the future. She doesn't believe that there's only one path. She says that before we cut back to Kaneda and Kei as they escape with their mysterious new ally as the man drives his van through the military checkpoint without a hitch. We then catch up with Ryu, who's been posing as a construction worker in order to gather intel on the military's secret operation. He's observed an increase in military personnel at the site, causing him to order the Resistance to execute their plan ASAP. Our focus then returns to Kaneda and Kei. Kaneda sits slurping down a bowl of ramen with the man who assisted their escape, as Kei convenes with Chiyoko, a weapons expert for the Resistance. Their conversation mostly revolves around the bespectacled man, and whether or not he's trustworthy. Not entirely sure, Kei accepts responsibility for taking care of him if he's not. We then get this classic Kaneda-Kei exchange before she declares her plan to head to the Olympic site. The bespectacled man begs to join them, to which Kei agrees, but not before laying down the law and telling him just how little she really trusts him. We then get this kind of ominous panel that gives a sense that this man might not be entirely altruistic. Our view then shifts to the skies above the city, where a helicopter's blades whir violently. Inside of it, we see the Colonel, Dr. Onishi, and several other scientists who are en route to the Olympic site to intercept Tetsuo, who's just walked right up to Akira's doorstep. The group of confused guards doesn't stand a chance against his telekinetic powers. They're reduced to bloody corpses in no time as he makes his way inside. Shortly after, the Colonel's helicopter arrives. He disembarks along with the scientists and multiple soldiers wielding the experimental laser beams. In the sewers below the Olympic site, Kaneda, Kei, and the bespectacled man trudge through the muck, bickering all the way. Ryu and the Resistance, disguised as military, trace their way through the facility as they execute their plan from earlier. In other words, this is it. Everyone's disparate paths are set to converge one way or another. Tetsuo stands at a massive freight elevator as soldiers amass to stop him. Kaneda's group walks the same path they'd taken previously, but in reverse, a feeling of unease washing over them the further into the labyrinthine corridors they go. At the same time, the Colonel follows the same path Tetsuo took through the facility, taking in all the destruction he wrought along his way. Tetsuo descends the lift. The Colonel angrily makes his way through the chaos, barking out commands as he does. Ryu does his best to keep his mission on the rails, as his accomplice's confidence falters under the distress of the situation they just walked into. Along the way, we learn that it will take Tetsuo 15 minutes to descend the shaft leading to Akira. Meanwhile, Kaneda and Kei are progressing through the facility, where they reach a deserted control center. Once they're inside, they hear a radio report discussing the situation unfolding on the elevator. Some soldiers open fire on Tetsuo from hovercrafts. He's ready for them, however, taking one of them out in a fiery show of force. The other two barrel down on him, their headlights right in his eyes, before we cut away. In the lab, we see Dr. Onishi discussing with his colleagues the merits of attempting to work with Tetsuo, when he's interrupted. It appears that the soldiers on hovercrafts weren't enough to stop Tetsuo. The temperature in Akira's chamber is increasing. Someone, or something, is trying to awaken him. Chapter 10, The Awakening. Chapter 10 opens with Kaneda, Kei, and the bespectacled man as they continue to navigate the maze-like military facility in which Akira is housed. As they stop to gather their bearings, light shines from the other end of the darkened tunnel. It's another hovercraft patrol. Kaneda pulls up his sleeves and, with a look of determination, plants himself right in the middle of the passage, directly in the path of the approaching vehicles. Kei calls out in shock, but Kaneda seems to have a plan. While this is happening, we get a glimpse of the military control room. We learn that only the temperature in the internal chamber that houses Akira is rising, and that soon it will be at critical. And while the doctor initially suspected a system malfunction, he learns that the system's functioning properly. It's Akira. His powers are resonating with Tetsuo's. Interspersed with the doctor's dawning revelation, we see Tetsuo demonstrating his awe-inspiring power, evading bullet barrages and obliterating hovercrafts. Followed by the doctor explaining that Tetsuo's psychic powers are likely on the same wavelength as Akira's, which would likely be enough to begin the awakening of Akira's powers, even through cryosleep. Akira's awakening is likely to continue to increase with each display of power from Tetsuo, now that he's reached the facility. The doctor suggests halting the attack immediately. On the elevator platform, we see Tetsuo slump to the ground, depleted from the amount of energy he expended to get there. From their vantage point, Ryu and the other resistance member notice that the elevator stopped and decide to venture down to investigate. When they get there, Ryu rushes right over to Tetsuo, seeing that he's still just a kid and he's potentially hurt. We then follow back up with Kaneda's crew as they navigate the installation via the hoverbike they commandeered earlier. The bespectacled man hangs on for dear life as Kei does her best to maintain control over it. As they come speeding up to an opening, she realizes she doesn't know how to stop. Out ahead of them, they see another hoverbike patrol. They shoot out of the opening and into the air, where they fly right past the hoverbike and into the colonel's entire squadron that's held up at the top of the elevator shaft after the ceasefire. The colonel orders them to hold their fire, even though he vaguely recognizes them. Kaneda, Kei, and the bespectacled man barrel down the elevator shaft right towards the stalled platform where Tetsuo and Ryu are. They duck out of the way as the trio maintain their uncontrollable descent. Kei somehow recognizes Ryu, calling out to him as they fall. Tetsuo also recognizes Kaneda, but he doesn't have much time to dwell on it, as the colonel and his troops begin descending the shaft. The colonel gets on the loudspeaker in an attempt to bargain with Tetsuo, but it's no use. Tetsuo wants no part of what he's selling, instead using his powers to destroy more hovercrafts. At the bottom of the shaft, Kaneda, Kei, and the bespectacled man come dangerously close to crashing. But Kaneda takes the controls, helping Kei maneuver the bike out of danger long enough for them to bail before it crashes in a fiery explosion that separates the two of them from the bespectacled man. Kaneda's first concern is Kei's well-being, but she's more concerned with Ryu's, pointing out the fact that he's a sitting duck in his current location. But, as Kaneda points out, so are they, and he urges they get to cover. Meanwhile, on the elevator platform, we see that Tetsuo is essentially having his way with the colonel's forces. The colonel, fearing yet another spike in Tetsuo's connection to Akira, orders them to retreat, which pleases Tetsuo, although he doesn't quite understand the reasoning. In the lower levels of the facility, Kaneda attempts to break down a door, eventually succeeding after multiple attempts. The temperatures inside are absolutely frigid, but the duo move forward anyway. Meanwhile, the bespectacled man is scouting near the elevator shaft, apparently having found what he truly came to the military compound for. If you haven't figured out his identity yet, I won't spoil it for you completely, but let's just say this won't be his first run-in with Resistance members other than K. As Kaneda and K push further into the frigid corridor, they come to a remote command center. K, examining the computer console, realizes that they have a map directly to Akira. K's downright exuberant at the discovery, but Kaneda remains reticent. He wants to know who or what exactly Akira is, and if he's worth the risk of entering the maze-like structure surrounding the chamber, as well as the very likely possibility of running into the Colonel. The Colonel, meanwhile, prepares to meet face-to-face with Tetsuo by telling his soldiers to hold their fire unless he orders. He gives them very clear instructions that, if he is killed and they must open fire, they must kill Tetsuo with the first shot. There will be no second chances. As Ryu and his fellow Resistance members search the facility for Tetsuo, they're stopped in their tracks by the realization they're being watched by the bespectacled man. Meanwhile, Kaneda and Kei watch from the control room as Tetsuo uses his powers to open the gigantic blast doors behind them. They duck out of sight behind the console as he passes en route to a high security door that Kei believes must lead to Akira. Meanwhile, Ryu faces off with the bespectacled man, who finally reveals his true identity as the military spy. Without hesitation, the spy sprints forward, catching Ryu with a punch to the gut that makes him double over in pain. The other Resistance member is too caught off guard to act, and he takes a punch directly to the nose as a result. The spy then extracts a blade from his sleeve, poising himself to take the killing blow on Ryu. But, just then, a blinding light shines down on the spy. It's the Colonel and his men. He orders them to ignore the skirmish, but it's enough of a distraction for Ryu to run off in pursuit of Kei, who he believes the military captured again. As this is happening, Tetsuo uses his powers to activate and unlock the complex mechanism within the vault door. Kei gasps when she witnesses this, almost alerting him to their presence, but Tetsuo's attention is captured by the Colonel's arrival. He enters via the blast doors, flanked by scientists and soldiers alike, crying out to Tetsuo, who the military codenamed Number 41 previously. Tetsuo just laughs and beckons Dr. Onishi to join him in his pursuit of Akira. The doctor attempts to reason with him before the Colonel cuts back in. He's adamant that Tetsuo should let sleeping dogs lie. He tells Tetsuo he should not disturb Akira because once he awakens, no one can control him. According to the Colonel, Akira represents a power beyond understanding. Tetsuo, ignoring the Colonel's warnings, decides to enter the chamber anyway. The Colonel orders the doctors into the control room to monitor the chamber's readings. The doctors rush into the room, which forces Kaneda and Kei to flee their hiding spot behind the control panel. Kaneda pulls off a vent grate, and the duo narrowly escape capture by sliding in before the doctors rush into the room to take their readings. The doctors fall into panic. They note the temperature of the central chamber has continued to increase without any malfunction in the surrounding system. The Colonel calls out to Tetsuo one more time, this time using his real name rather than his code name, in one last-ditch attempt to reason with him. But it's too late. Tetsuo moves further into the chamber, at which point the Colonel orders his men to fire. 4 laser beams fire on Tetsuo simultaneously. He was caught off guard by the shot and unable to put his defenses up. but the beams all converged and explode before him, leaving him reeling but unscathed. Tetsuo gasps and looks behind himself to witness the chamber labeled Akira being torn apart by some unseen force. The scientists believe that the laser struck the door wall, but all of the walls are being breached simultaneously from the inside. The colonel tries to prepare his men to take another shot, but Tetsuo says that it's already over. Pipes hiss as they detach from the chamber. Then Tetsuo looks up, and, in a milky glow, the young boy rises from the top of the chamber. Chapter 11, Akira Rising. This chapter opens with the ghastly appearance of Akira still on the page. Tetsuo looks on in shock and awe. As the smoke clears, Akira takes on a more corporeal form, dressed in a white hospital uniform. The colonel and the scientists observe the effects of Akira's emergence helplessly through their instruments. They're terrified of the developments unfolding, forcing the colonel to try and regain some level of control over the situation. He grabs one of the scientists and demands he do something to fix the breach in the central chamber, but the man just sputters uselessly. Over the colonel's shoulder, we see the scene unfolding outside of the command center. The doctor and a squad of soldiers look on. Dr. Onishi is in absolute awe of what he's seeing, Akira's awakening. As the doctor processes this, a cold snap spreads through the facility. Ice forms on his face and around his mustache almost instantaneously. According to the colonel, the supercoolant used to hold Akira in cryo is bleeding into the air, causing the flash freezing. He orders everyone to get into the control room before they freeze to death. We also see as the flash freeze starts to affect Kaneda and Kei in the ventilation duct, as well as Ryu, who's still disguised as a soldier and wandering the tunnels of the underground facility in search of Kei. Meanwhile, we see the colonel as he orders the shields lowered around the control room. One of the men warns the colonel that Dr. Onishi is still outside, and he points to where the doctor stands frozen in place, quite literally, exactly where he stood when he recognized the awakening of Akira. Then, the supercooled air begins to short-circuit all the electrical systems. Seeing the utter state of things, one of the scientists decides to declare a Code 7 emergency and sounds the alarm, much to the colonel's displeasure. The colonel shoves that scientist away from the console, calling him an imbecile, for the colonel doesn't yet believe that Akira has awoken. While the two men bicker, we see the absolutely gruesome image of Dr. Onishi attempting to enter the control room just as the shield doors shutter down in front of him. He ends up frozen with a look of absolute terror on his face. The entire area surrounding Akira's chamber is now frozen, and it's spreading deeper into the facility, where a group of soldiers attempt to flee via hovercraft before the bulkhead door shutters. They see Ryu in the distance, and, mistaking him for a member of the military, they tell him to hop on. Meanwhile, the spy and the other resistance member continue to duke it out. As the resistance member gets the upper hand, the elevator platform begins to move. The spy explains that the Code 7 alarm means that the higher-ups classify the emergency as more dangerous than a nuclear attack. Above ground, we see the chaos as Neo Tokyo reacts to the alarm. We also see Lady Miyako, who is in the middle of a meeting with Mr. Nizu, where she says no one could have prevented Akira's awakening, as it was always destined to be. Nizu is shocked, and her supporters are in a frantic rush to move her to shelter, but Lady Miyako is calm. She knows that they have some time before the danger reaches them. We also get a brief glimpse of the Espers as they become aware of Akira's awakening, before we move back to the Olympic site. In the center of the crater that lies in the heart of all the destruction, a concealed blast door slides open. It's the main hatch to the military installation, and the colonel and doctors alike seem alarmed that it's opening. But Tetsuo is grateful he found a direct exit. He beckons Akira to get going before they freeze to death. One of the colonel's men drops to the floor, sending a renewed panic through the ranks. Temperatures continue to drop, well past the level at which the emergency heating system should have kicked on. We can see the impact this is having on Kei and Kaneda in their hiding spot as well, as the vents begin to freeze and bust all around them, prompting them to find a way out. As Ryu and the group of soldiers on the hovercraft try to escape the spreading flash freeze, one of the engines goes out. The craft still has enough power to get them up the elevator shaft, but they're cutting it close. As the soldiers pass the lift, we see that the spy has the upper hand on the disguised resistance member. The spy stands over him with his knife raised, which causes the soldiers to open fire on him, as they think the resistance member is military, and they are unaware of the spy's presence on the base. The soldiers attempt to rescue the disguised resistance member from the elevator, pulling him up enough that he can grab onto the skid. But the spy rises up like the Undertaker and attacks the resistance member once again, causing the remaining engine on the vehicle to sputter. One of the soldiers decides it's not worth the risk of crashing, and opens fire on the battling duo that hangs from the skid, sending them thudding back to the elevator platform. Ryu demands that they go back for his friend, but the soldiers don't listen. They just say it's too late to save him, and continue their ascent. Deep inside the facility, Kaneda and Kei navigate the interior walls of the facility in an attempt to find an exit. As they're passing through a channel of metal grating, a flash of electricity rocks the opening ahead of them. We then see the same power surge course through the instruments in the control room. We see multicolored buttons and screens come to life as the systems come back online. On the CCTV, the colonel monitors Tetsuo and Akira's ascent through the open blast doors. It's the first time the colonel has seen Akira for himself, and you can really see the terror in his face. He orders them to call in Labo. The scientists act as if he's overreacting, but he says the trouble has only just begun. They need missiles, fighter jets, all the force they can muster to prevent Akira from using his powers. When Tetsuo and Akira reach the aperture of the blast doors, Akira is overcome by the brightness of the outside world after being locked up for so long. Seeing this on the CCTV, the colonel gets an idea. He calls in Soul. The scientists are nervous at the prospect, but the colonel has decided. They must destroy both Tetsuo and Akira while they still have a chance. As Tetsuo and Akira climb out of the facility and into the craggy crater, we see that Kaneda and Kei also found their way up to the roof opening, and that they're not too far behind the psychokinetic duo. However, the blast doors begin to slide shut, forcing Kaneda and Kei to have to book it to make it out in time. They just barely make it by the skin of their teeth, Kaneda even being forced to buy Kei some extra time to shimmy through the opening at the end. When she emerges, she reflexively falls into his arms. He thinks it's a hug, but when she rips herself away from him and smacks him with full force, you can see the confusion and pain mingle on his face. He asks what that was for, but her attention is already elsewhere. She's absolutely amazed to realize that they're in the heart of destruction, and that the Resistance now has information of the top secret military base located beneath it. Just as she's putting the pieces together, Kaneda spots Tetsuo on the crest of the basin. It's Kei who spots Tetsuo's companion. The shock of realization that it could really be Akira washes over her, just as the pair make their way over the hill and out of sight. Tetsuo seems on edge, as if he senses danger. Then he looks up and sees a giant ball of fire in the sky bearing down on him. The blast from the heavens comes down with a massive explosion that tears the already ravaged landscape apart even further. Its shockwave pushes Kei and Kaneda back and sends Tetsuo rolling down the hill through the debris. We get a brief glimpse of the colonel berating his subordinate for missing, as we then get to see the source of the blast, a satellite named Sol orbiting high above the Earth. The colonel orders another shot to be taken as fast as possible. The satellite fires again, creating more destruction in its wake. Tetsuo calls out to Akira, who gets separated from him in the blast. Kaneda and Kei try to run away, but end up being caught in the cascading rubble and need to take shelter behind a boulder. Tetsuo climbs atop a different boulder and calls out for Akira, searching the wreckage for him. He sees the boy laying unconscious on the ground and cries out, but the rippling explosion of the landscape sends Tetsuo flying before he can retrieve him. Kaneda and Kei wind up closer to the boy, and even though Kaneda protests, Kei approaches him where he lies, where we can see on his upturned hand the number 28 etched into his palm. Even more proof that he is the enigmatic titular character of this saga. Before we can see what Kei decides to do with the boy, we see more shots from Sol rip through the landscape. They're so powerful they even begin to penetrate the base's blast doors. Somehow, Tetsuo is still alive within the fiery blaze that's engulfed the area. He attempts to pull himself to his feet by pushing off a boulder with bloody fingers, but as he tries to lift his other arm, he realizes it's no longer fully attached to his body. Even his powers couldn't protect him from the power of Sol. Nearby, we see Kaneda struggling to carry the unconscious Akira down the hill, grumbling the whole time. Kei is concerned about Ryu's status, but there's no time to linger. She follows closely behind him. We get one last panel of Tetsuo holding his bloody stump of an arm and screaming into the sky in sheer agony. Then the issue ends. Alright, so that was a pretty crazy episode there. So much action, so much intrigue. I almost hate to cut it off here. I started getting the next chapter ready because it just felt like I was leaving off on such a high point, but this episode has been enough of a slog for me to get together as it is, so I'm sticking to the 3-chapter standard. I had to redo my entire video making process from top to bottom on this one. A new mic, new recording space, new software. So it really is just like I started from scratch. I apologize if this is, a bit rough. Hopefully the quality will get better and more consistent as I go along. But thank you for everybody who watches and anybody who's still listening this long in. I hope to see you on the next episode.